Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch video, and today we're taking a look at the Patek Philippe Nautilus reference 5711 in full rose gold. As with all my reviews, let's go back in time now and take a look at the history of this Nautilus. We're going to go back into the 1960s. This was around a time where everyone was really looking to the future and future technologies, computers, space travel, etc., etc. So it was a real movement as a general world society. We were all looking just at the future and what the future could offer and any futuristic technologies. So in the late 60s, along came an amazing technology for watchmaking called Quartz, or Quartz Movements, from Japan. And the Quartz Movements were so groundbreaking in the watch market that people were just immediately enamored by them and obsessed with them and wanted to buy them. The Quartz Movement offered so many brilliant upgrades versus a mechanical movement, like, for example, a 2-year power reserve in some cases, depending on the battery, sometimes even more. It was far more reliable, far more accurate than a standard mechanical movement, and required little to no servicing, and it also cost a fraction of a mechanical movement. So there was a massive pull towards Quartz Movements and the general public buying Quartz Movements and Quartz watches, and that obviously had a detrimental effect on the mechanical watch industry, and the luxury watch industry like Patek Philippe and Audemars Piguet. All of these brands really knew they had to release something exceptional in order to bring back the audience that they had lost. And they didn't go down the route of trying to undercut the Quartz watches and make things cheaper, or improving reliability, etc. All they did actually was make the mechanical watches even more expensive as a way to really show people, hey, we're not trying to be the cheapest, the most reliable watches out there. We're literally just here to make the most beautiful, luxurious timepieces we can possibly make. And these are really expensive compared to Quartz watches. So they expanded the gap between Quartz and mechanical in an effort to make people realize that the luxury side of mechanical watches was far more valuable than it being reliable. So in 1971, Audemars Piguet was the leader of trying to bring back people. I mean, actually, Zenith with the Defy was one of the early watches that tried to bring back more sales into the mechanical movements. But the big major player really was the 1971 Gerald Genta Royal Oak, which was with Audemars Piguet, which was a groundbreaking watch and still to this day is one of the most important watches ever released. And the Royal Oak was actually released in 1972, but Gerald Genta designed it in 1971. And it was a almost unheard of level of price point for a steel watch, and it was a steel sports watch, but it was finished to an exceptional standard. It was finished to a standard maybe exceeding, in fact, a dress watch in terms of its level of hand finishing. So it was extremely expensive and difficult to make in steel, and that led to the extremely expensive price point. It didn't sell very well, but it wasn't until really a few years later on, or a couple of years later on, when the general public really realized what Audemars Piguet was doing with the Royal Oak and how incredible and how groundbreaking it was, that it then started to sell despite its incredibly high price point. And then a couple of years later on, Patek Philippe followed suit, and Gerald Genta went to Patek Philippe and designed the Nautilus for them in 1974, which then got released in 1976. And that first reference, the Nautilus, was the reference 3700. Patek Philippe, though, as a brand, was actually a little bit reluctant to release the Nautilus, but they knew that based on the success of the Royal Oak, that it was definitely a path that they needed to go down in order to maintain sales or try to regain sales that they used to have. As a result of the Quartz crisis. Patek was so afraid that it was so off-brand for them. At that point, they only offered dress watches in precious metals. They didn't offer any sports watches, so it was incredibly different to anything they had in the collection. And they were worried that all their clients really would receive it poorly and it would do very, very badly. But it's actually now one of the most successful watches in the watch industry, so they definitely didn't make the wrong decision here by introducing it in 1976. The watch was also designed similar to the Royal Oak with the inspiration from a ship porthole. So it has that amazing kind of window effect, which is really, really cool looking, especially the way that Patek has done it, or Giorgiento has done it with Patek, with the kind of ears, makes it look like the hinges of a porthole, which makes it actually look more realistic maybe in some respects than the Royal Oak from Audemars Piguet. The watch also had an incredible high water resistance of 120 meters, which was totally unheard of for a Patek Philippe. All their dress watches probably had a water resistance of around 30 meters, sometimes less, sometimes a tiny bit more, but never really more than 30 to 50 meters. So this was pretty a groundbreaking timepiece, and obviously matched with the fact that it was named Nautilus to be, residing in the sea. Again, not particularly popular at first, which obviously panicked Patek Philippe, but a few years later on it became extremely popular, and to this day is probably their best-selling watch in the whole collection. Various models Patek has released over the years, more complicated variations, simple variations like the standard 5711, but in 2006, which marked the 30th anniversary for the Nautilus, Patek released the 5711, which is what we're looking at today, and that was a totally redesigned Nautilus. And from then on, this watch is destined to be a success and has continually sold for over its list price and been extremely difficult to get at the recommended retail price. So that concludes the history of the 5711 and the Nautilus for Patek Philippe. Let's take a look at the features of this watch. We're going to start, as always, with the clasp. The clasp on this watch is a double deployant clasp. It is a really beautiful, elegant, very delicate clasp on this watch. It is beautifully machined, probably hand finished as well, and I love the way that it seamlessly blends into the bracelet. You almost don't even detect that it's there. I love the way that the Calatrava cross is also on the center parts of the clasp. But yeah, beautiful clasp. The only thing that I don't love about this clasp, well, two things: no adjustability, which can mean that the watch can become a little bit uncomfortable if your wrist expands a bit in the summer. But the main thing that's a little bit annoying about this is the fact it is quite difficult to get off smoothly. I'm always a little bit scared taking this watch off, because you do have to just pull it really hard. There's no kind of technical way to take this watch off. And when you're wearing a watch that's, in some respects, for certain years, £230,000 for this particular model, you are a little bit wary, especially if you're out on the street in concrete or wherever. You just don't want to drop it. So I wish they made it maybe with some triggers, some twin triggers, like Audemars Piguet does, which makes it a little bit easier to take off, or if there was a way that you could get your fingernail underneath it and pop it like that, it would be a bit more controlled. But at the moment you just have to kind of pull it, which isn't the best. Moving on to the bracelet. The bracelet is a nice bracelet on this watch. I don't like it as much as I like the Royal Oak bracelet. I think the Royal Oak is far more intricate and beautiful, but this watch is still, this bracelet, is still a very beautiful bracelet. It has lots and lots of detail on it. It is really comfortable as well. I like how thin and narrow it is in terms of, conforming to your wrist. Each link is very flat and fits really snugly to your wrist, which is nice. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the bubble effect on this bracelet. I find that the bracelet scratches quite easily on those bubbles, as they do protrude slightly out from the actual flat surface or flush surface of the bracelet. So yeah, it does become a little bit of a scratch magnet, and you do see them because they're right on the polished parts of the bracelet. But really comfortable overall, and I do really like the taper at the top, the way it kind of seamlessly moves into the case. It is very, very beautiful. I like the little beveled edges as well. In polish finish, everything is really nice, and I like the way that most of the case and the bracelet is in brush finish too. It does make it look very, very beautiful and kind of utilitarian in some respects, despite the fact it is an extremely expensive watch and finished to an exceptional standard. Moving on to our case now, we've got a beautiful case. I really love the ears on this watch. I said before, obviously that matches with the porthole design that this watch is inspired by. The fact you've got your left hand ear, which is like your hinge, and then your right hand side of the watch is almost like a clasp or a latch that you would unhook the window from to open it up. So yeah, really beautiful design, very, very true actually to a porthole, compared to maybe something like a Royal Oak or an Overseas that was also Giorgiento designed. The case also has just such a perfect balance of polished and brush finishes too. I really find that mesmerizing how Patek has finished this case. It is really stunning, and everything is so detailed and refined. On a watch that's so flat and relatively small surface to work with, it is pretty impressive to see a watch with this level of complex finishing, especially in a sports watch. Moving on to our case back now, we have a clear crystal case back which shows off our beautiful movement. Most of that movement is hand finished as well, which you can definitely see when you look through that exhibition case back. You can tell that it is exceptionally finished, and many hours have been spent to make it look as beautiful as that. We've got a 22 carat rotor as well with the Calatrava cross on, which is a lovely kind of Patek Philippe signature. Really love that Pateks, and the rotors on Pateks just spin so freely. It is magical, and they're quite loud as well, which I love the feel of. And to listen to that rotor spinning, you can really hear it, especially on something like a 5712 or a Nautilus. You can hear that rotor spinning as it's on your wrist. It's amazing, and they spin just so freely too, like I said. Moving on to our dial now, we've got a beautiful brown dial with this kind of ripple effect on the dial. It looks absolutely stunning. That combo of brown and rose gold is just so exquisite. The hands are also really simple, and the index markers are really simple. The dial, the date window is very simple too. Everything about the dial is very clean, extremely legible as well. And that combo of brown and rose gold is just a classic. It's so beautiful to see, especially on a watch that's finished to this level. I love the way that the dial is almost in a way a little bit sunbursty in the way that it's kind of laser etched. It's got that kind of shimmer and sheen to it. It's not flat. And I love also the way that it's got this gradient color or hue or tone. As you move further into the center of the dial, the tone or hue of the brown, the tone of the brown gets a little bit lighter, and as you move out to the edges, it kind of gradients down into a much darker color or tone, which is lovely. Really nice. Kind of brings your eye to the center of the dial, to those hands, which is just really beautiful. One thing I absolutely love about this watch, and also the rest of the watches from Patek in rose gold, is the fact that the rose gold from Patek is almost a little bit yellow. It's definitely the most yellow of most brands in the industry when it comes to rose gold. Rolex obviously has ever rose gold, which is extremely pink compared to other brands, but this rose gold is much more on the yellow side, which I actually really like. It makes this watch look a little bit more subtle, a bit more classic, and I feel like this watch therefore goes a little bit more unnoticed. It's a perfect balance in a way between yellow and rose. It's kind of like a perfect midpoint between the two. So that concludes the features of the watch. Let's take a look now at whether or not I would own this piece. I would definitely own this watch, even though I usually only like watches on straps. I do think this watch is exceptionally beautiful and an extremely special piece. The watch is obviously extremely expensive now, far over its list price, 5 times its list price now. You know, some of them going up to £250,000, sometimes more, depending on the set and the condition. This particular example is available from us now. It is a 2019 example. This watch has gone up in insane amounts in value over the last few years. Really impressive, the growth that this 5711 has seen. And obviously it was discontinued not so long ago, which has obviously majorly contributed to its increasing growth in price or value. Obviously that's one big reason to want to own this watch, is essentially an extension of your stock portfolio or your bank account on your wrist. And I'm sure this will continue to perform very well despite its recent price correction. But yeah, overall this watch is an exceptionally beautiful watch. I would definitely own it. I think it's an extremely special piece when you put it on, and that kind of flat and low profile design makes it actually incredibly wearable on a day-to-day basis. Definitely a grail watch for sure. Thanks guys for watching. Let us know in the comments what you think of this 5711. Do you prefer this or the steel variation, or maybe you prefer 5980, or maybe you prefer just a classic complicated Patek, a dress watch? Let us know in the comments what other watches you'd like us to review. And as always, if you're interested in this watch, we also have a link to it in the description for the listing and other watches that we have for sale. If you've got any other questions about this watch, our details are in the description as well, and also at the end of the video. It would be a pleasure to help you however we can.